Welcome. Glad that you are all here. And we get to continue our journey on discussing technology and how to engage it. So let's refresh quickly on some of what we talked about last time, which was October. So we'll get to dust off a little bit of the cobwebs. We began with a question: why do we need to talk about technology? Well, there are a few reasons that we discussed, we looked through. Um, Technology is everywhere, pervasive. We encounter it, we use it, we utilize it, whether we intend to or choose to ourselves or not. We see technology all over the world. And so it's there. We need to be able to engage it. Encroaching, anybody who is here can remember, what did we talk about with technology being not just pervasive everywhere, but encroaching? What do we mean? Going off of the definition of the word, right? Creeping in. Uh huh. Good.
It's like everywhere. It's in our cars. It's in various areas of our home. Like, yeah, creeping into every area of our life.
And does it seem? Oh, somebody else was gonna say something.
I was going to say, just even, as far as encroaching, like once upon a time, there was never a choice. Do I want my receipt electronically or paper or both? So it's, these steps moving into my life in a way that becomes more comfortable.
Yeah, it's moving in. Yeah, it doesn't seem content to stay where it is in our lives. It is growing and has been, and we should assume will continue to. With that, people are developing, growing, building new means of technology, and so it's rapidly changing. It's not the same thing that it was 10 years ago. It's very different. 10 years from now, again, technology will be very different than it is right now. And we talked about several potential dangers. Anybody who was here remember, or maybe just brainstorm whether you're here or not. What are some potential dangers you can think about that come with the reality of technology in our lives? Dependence. Good. Keep going.
That's the things you would not want access to.
Okay. Content issues where you're having access to things that you shouldn't have access to. Good.
Distraction.
Distraction. Very good.
Well, this is one thing I read in a book that was talking about the growth of maturity in intellectual side of things and like knowledge, but not a growth in emotional capacity.
Yeah, kind of stunting our development in one part of who we are because of how people maybe using technology as they grow. Great thoughts, lots of things. Stuff that we mentioned, we talked about addiction, this idea similar to dependence, particularly with young people as our brains are developing until they're 25. 24% of adolescents report being constantly connected to the internet. 50% feel addicted to their phones. We use an image of a riverbed. This is an analogy that came from Kathy Cook. I'll mention her a little bit later too. As our brains are developing, they're softer, they're more pliable, and there are synapses, connections that happen from one part of a brain to another. And so when you do something, you are forming a connection. There's synapses that are firing from one place to the other. When your brain is a little more pliable, the more you do that, it forms channels a little more easily. It makes those connections a little easier to return to, which is one of the reasons when people are younger, as their brain is still developing, they can more easily become addicted to things. So, particularly as how do we utilize technology? How do our young people utilize technology in their lives, and what do they look to it for? They can, at a young stage, if they're not careful, more easily become addicted than older people can, although everybody's susceptible. Well, we can all choose to use technology in a way that makes us addicted to it. Doreen.
Yeah, just like they said, they can be distracted and they can be very focused on that. Like they're in the car and they're doing it, or they're out with public people and somebody may be speaking and they're on their technology.
Yep.
Because I don't know if it's being taught at home, like how to balance that and be respectful of that. So it becomes more of a focus, and even if somebody's up front them, you know.
Yes.
Kind of hard to see how that's changed. Yeah, anyways.
Even just our relationships in person, which is actually the next point that we talked about, is difficulty relating in person. As people get more attuned to what's going on their phone, and sometimes maybe that's easier. And so that's a way to go to avoid whatever you want to avoid around you.
And I think also, especially for the youth today, relating to people through technology is sometimes like all they know. Like I get, like most of us have a grasping point of what life was like before technology and social media and messaging, all these things. Most of our youth don't have that idea of what it's like. So this is pretty much all they know how to really communicate with people, unless they're taught like, hey, no, like, unless they're taught what life is like without technology and so forth.
Right. Thank you. Difference between what people are now calling a digital native versus a non-native. If you grew up and experienced life without the assumption of technology and a smartphone and connected through wireless everywhere you go, you're not a native. You learned life without it first and then you adapted. Whereas people now are growing up with it as an assumption of how we live. I mentioned escapism. Not only difficulty relating in person, but as an easier way to go, or spending more time in virtual reality or places that are just digital. What we do with technology and our communication on social media, playing games, all that is real. But we need to have a balance where we understand what the real world is and our actions in digital media and what they mean in the real world, and not replacing the real world with virtual reality or digital media. So escapism. And content, a big one would be pornography. We talked about this. 1 out of 3 Americans on a monthly basis, at least once a month, seek out pornography. And this was from a study back in 2015. So this very well may have increased since then. We looked previously at how this breaks down differently for categories by Christian or non-Christian or man or woman or age, but when you lump all of them together, this is a huge and a staggering statistic that is reality, that 1 out of 3 are seeking out porn at least once a month. There are a lot of reasons that we need to be talking about technology. Because left to its own devices, it may be leading us in directions that we don't want to be going. So we went from there, why should we, to how should we approach technology? I proposed often we have kind of a split where we may tend to avoid as the answer to the problems. Let's just separate. Burn the phones. Try to prohibit youth, young people, children in our lives from having anything to do with technology. Or the opposite would be, who remembers if you were here? Or what do you think would be the opposite to avoiding?
Embrace.
Yeah. Embrace in a way I called surrender. Just whatever it's got, that's fine. That's just life. We're just going to accept whatever is there. What are problems with either side? If we try to just avoid technology and say, you're never getting a phone while you're under my roof, and we don't use email as a family, what are some problems that come with that?
I just think about the kid who's so sheltered that when they get out into the real world and they are not prepared for all the temptations or things that can come with that, that they then can go to the far extreme of the other side. That's what I always think about when parents are so restrictive on things.
Right, well said. Eventually, they're going to not be under our roof if we're talking about our relationship with our children. And they're going to be making their own decisions. If they're not prepared,
They don't know how to interact with it in the first place. How are they going to cope with that?
often these people going off the deep end. Jen.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and then along with the same thing, even in your professional world, if you're not able to understand the functions of what's expected of you in the job that you go into, something as simple as being able to send a fax or an email I mean, it sounds alarmingly like one side or the other extreme, but that's the same idea is
Exactly.
if you don't have access to that or don't know how, that's gonna literally retard your abilities to grow as you get into your own life.
Right.
When you also completely remove the ability for you to help guide them when they do find things while they're in the home, under your roof, under your supervision.
So technology is a part of today's world. We need to be able to utilize it in order to function, in order to have the jobs that most of us have. And then as we want to train our children to be able to function in today's society, they need to have skills to be able to do it as well. Jareen, you were going to say something else?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it. I mean, like, this year we've been letting Kelly get on the computer more, and just because she has some classes where she has to send information online through, what is it called, Google Docs or whatever. And so, anyway, so that's been interesting for us, and it's been kind of, but what's been interesting too is just to see how she's asking me questions like, Mom, what does that mean, or why is that this, or, because she does like to go on YouTube and just like listen to music or do something, and I'm like, and part of it is, you know, I trust her, so I'm trying to work through that, and I check in on her, and the door's always open, and we're just trying to go through this process slowly, and, you know, because she wants to email and do different things, which she has that option now. She's enjoying it, but it's a privilege, so.
Yeah.
it's, you know, there can be losses too, if it's gonna, you know, go a different way. But I have appreciated how she's asking questions when she's not sure about something. And so that's been a blessing. I'm very thankful for that she's been open to share that with us, you know, different things. But at the same time, I always like if they're too young and they're seeing a lot of technology, what that's doing to their brain. And so just finding a balance with that. And then I think something else that was encouraging that I talked to parents about is that maybe waiting a little bit longer with the phone, or a little bit longer on certain things, and just that it slowly and then progressed as they're in high school. They've turned out okay, like things have went, because this day and age, they seem to figure it out really quick. Even my daughter with typing things up, she's showing me things I had no idea. I was like, wow, I didn't know I could do that, you know, because she's exploring. But it's just an interesting stage right now.
Yeah, so rather than avoiding, you're slowly, and it sounds like you mentioned a lot of healthy things with how you're interacting with Kelly. You're slowly introducing things that she is learning, and she's learning fine. And you are engaged and interacting good. So
And she's learning responsibility with getting her class her stuff on time for her class.
so that she can function, which would be a problem of avoiding, that she wouldn't be able to even turn stuff in for her school. So let's go to the other side. What are some issues if we don't avoid, but we just surrender and say, great, whatever you want is fine?
I think the end result for teaching kids is kind of the same with both. You get there a different path. If you completely avoid it, you're not going to know how to prepare your kids. So they're not going to be prepared to limit what they're doing or what they're seeing. And if you completely surrender, you're doing the same thing where you're not going to end up putting any limitations and stuff. So they're going to the same thing. They're not going to be prepared to know how to limit what they do and what they look for and what they see and how long they're using it. So the end result becomes pretty much the same if you go too far on either direction.
Yeah, that's good insight. That either way, somebody will end up without the ability to limit and use well technology, whether you avoid or surrender. Good. What are some other dangers that come with just a surrender approach to technology?
Too much time on it can change their behavior, their attitudes, I think personally. So if you watch how much time they're on, say, okay, our time's about up because we just need to have a break.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I've even noticed with myself, if I'm trying to do emails and just do different things, if I'm on too long, I feel a little more moody.
Yeah.
I don't know about anybody else, but, so I just watch it and just make sure that, you know, that's
So-
just me.
Yeah.
But I do feel a little more overwhelmed because I came from I learned a little bit about the computer when I was in high school, but I still feel like it's a little overwhelming for me because there's so much out there nowadays. I feel like, okay, God, just lead us through this, and I'm excited about the class and keep learning how to approach it in a safe manner for our kids so that they can develop the skills.
Well, for all of us, it's a step at a time. And so if we just surrender too much, it affects our moods, it affects our kids' moods, the way they're developing. Good. Other dangers if we just surrender.
I think even there's the physical dangers. For one thing, the eyes, the lighting of the computer screen or whatever can affect the eyes. There's a lot of research about the neck, and everyone's doing this, and their necks aren't developing well. And then, of course, course, the texting and driving, or texting and walking is almost as dangerous as texting and driving. And those kinds of things too that you often overlook.
Good,
It kind of goes along with what you're saying about your mood, but I think part of that mood is like your eyes are wearing out from staring at that screen for too long.
Negative physical effects. Uh-huh. Good.
What it creates at a very young age. I was reading this when Adrian was talking about different ways that people numb things. I mean, there's like the obvious, like alcohol and drugs and that kind of stuff, but like being on technology a lot is just as much of a numbing mechanism. It's just like, if you go on, you're talking about the difference between if you go on TV and you're just scrolling through channels, that's numbing versus going on to watch a specific show, right? And so a lot of times I think when kids have unlimited access to internet at a very young age, it leads to a ton of using that to avoid confrontation or avoid, like we were talking about, beforehand, like just like secluding themselves from feeling those deep emotions and actually understanding how to navigate them, because it's much easier to just watch YouTube videos.
Right.
And if I could do that all day because my parents don't check on me,
Then that's a lot easier
then I
for
would
everybody.
do that all day,
Right.
which I've seen.
So it doesn't work to just avoid. It's an essential part of the world. It doesn't work to just surrender, because what it tends toward will bring lots of the dangers we talked about and what you guys are all articulating in addition. And so instead, what do? We don't avoid or surrender. We
Engage. What is the magic word?
that's the word that I put to it, but we engage with our brains on, wanting to utilize what's there well. Okay, we talked briefly last time about what does the Bible say about technology. And surprisingly, there's not any passage that mentions the iPhone. But even when you look at the very beginning, we see a lot of things. God talked about what he created, and he said that it was very good. And he created humanity with the drive and the ability and the intellect to do and design what we have done. And he created us with the natural resources in the world to do what we have done. And all of that is said to be very good. So technology is very good. But the story doesn't end there. As we sought to take choice ourselves and rebel against God and say, I'm not going to listen to what you say is best. I'm going to try to choose for myself what is best. The curse came in and we all fell, and that affects all of the world. So it affects the resources, it affects our minds, it affects our intent, our hearts within that. And so just as we are created very good and we're cursed, what we make is very good, but is also cursed. So they're both present. So we need to keep tech in its rightful place. There are boundaries, healthy boundaries, to say yes and to say no. And one thing that we mentioned, and we kind of flew over a little bit, was this idea that the purpose of technology, why we use something, can help us to determine its use. Why we're using something can help us to think through if that is good or if that is not good. And that is where we're going to zoom in a little bit today as a new portion. What is the purpose of technology in our lives? At your tables, take just a couple of minutes, probably 2 minutes. And when I say designer, I mean the creator of the technology, the human person who made the technology. What is or are some of the purposes for which you think designers have created technology that we are using today? Ready, go, at your tables. What are some things you guys came up with?
Yeah.
To get a lot of data.
Marketing purposes.
So marketing, okay. What else?
Tools.
Tools?
Like fixing your photographs or, fixed
Yeah.
tools that you can use to.
Making things easier.
So tools to do things, period. Tools to make things easier for people. Uh-huh. Good. What else?
You're kind of talking about like to ease the effects of the fall. Like, like farming technology is like, the pronounced and cursed or whatever, so we developed technology to counteract that or whatever.
Yeah. Make us more efficient at something that could be hard to do. Great. What kind of
Communication.
help people communicate together? Very good.
Connection.
Connect.
I remember mentioning that last time we were talking about it a little bit, that you can, using a cell phone or an app within that to connect to somebody around the world that you wouldn't normally see or don't get to see because it's too expensive to travel, but in an instant they show up on the screen and you can connect that way.
Yeah. Which is a pretty cool tool.
It is pretty cool.
Well, from this table, what did you guys talk about?
Well, one of the things I said was just enjoyment, be able to creatively do things just because for the fun of it.
Yeah.
And be able to enjoy others' creative efforts and things.
All kinds of things that somebody who designs technology is for. In one sense, it's not really a fair question because it depends on the technology and it depends on the person. Somebody might think, I want to make something that is kind of cool, but really I just want to make a lot of money. And somebody else might think, I want to push back against the effects of the fall in our world, and I'm going to do that through my creation of whatever technology I use. And so it's a very diverse thing that often we probably won't even be able to answer unless we know the person who created it by themselves. But what does that mean for us? I think in part it means because it's so diverse, what people have intended for the technology is that we can't just stop there. Oftentimes technology is going to be utilized. We're going to use it in a way that may be in line with what somebody designed it for, or it may be different. They may have had good intent or they may not have good intent. We can't just stop with what do we think this is designed to do. I think we need to ask what is God's purpose for the technology in our life. And of course, God's purpose for why we have the tools that we do, I would argue, should become our purpose. So, according to that kind of a grid, not just what is something designed for, but how does God want us to utilize what we have, I think we need to zoom back a little bit to ask a bigger question of what is our purpose in general, because that helps us to answer the smaller pieces of what is the purpose of this, because it's going to fit in. Matthew 22, this is a great passage that provides a clear summary from Jesus himself, where there's a master of the law who is actually trying to test Jesus, and he asks, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus, you can see it here, he replies, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Pause there. The different parts, heart, soul, mind. Now there's absolutely benefit to thinking through the individual pieces of who we are. And when we step back and say, well, what does Jesus mean? It's not like if we think of something that is not our heart or our soul, then it doesn't matter what we do with it. I mean, he's giving us a big picture summary of love Jesus with all of you. And so we can help to think through that by thinking through the different parts, but really saying love God with all of who you are. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. So as we think through how we are going to utilize technology in our own lives and how we want to train our children or people around us to utilize technology, those things, the purposes of what we are doing need to align with what we see with our purpose in life. Does it help us to love God and to love others better? We've touched on this a little bit, as you guys have talked about even some of the things that technology is designed for, but let's refresh, and let's just stay as a large group here, but what are some of the things that technology is good at? Great. Efficiency, making it easier.
To find information for other things that it's not on technology.
Social connection is positive. I've lived in a few different states, and each place I accumulated Facebook friends, and now I'm able to feel like I'm close to them, like my old church friends, and see what's going on and be able to pray for them.
Yeah.
Like that.
It's a great way that we can become or stay connected with people. Yeah.
Some people that have learning challenges, technology helps a lot with their reading or with being able to hear it. And yeah, so learning challenges can really help with technology and what they've been able to develop. And it gives them the freedom, and then with spelling or different things, to help people feel like they can still communicate and learn a lot.
Yeah.
So, because everybody's gifted in different ways and have strengths, strong strengths, but even when they have those, so
Yeah.
it's good.
Good. Thank you. Brandon.
I mean, technology is also really good at saving life.
Yeah, yeah.
You think of how technology has brought about like cures for various things, help ease the pain of a lot of different things, and even help people just even lost the limbs to get back to a normal functioning world.
Yeah. Good. James.
Just think of it as a learning tool, not just in the educational sense, but just thinking of the archive of sermons that are available on the website from this church.
Yeah.
Those quite a bit in other churches as well. So, huge learning tool assist us in many ways.
Wonderful. Huge learning tool. Jen.
Just piggybacking on his comment, having your Bible at the touch of a screen, if you have your phone with you all the time, you have your Bible with you too. I think that's huge.
You know, interestingly, as much as some scientists develop different tools and take advantage of technology in so many ways with the intent of disputing that God is true, so much of the technology heightens who he is. You know, you think of all of the outer space observations now, you just can't avoid recognizing the immensity of the universe is created. These stars are suspended in how. And then you think even now, all the availability of examining the brain without having to crack it open. And they see the wonder of how we're created that exposes the truth of what God, who God is and what he says. And so that's wonderful.
That is.
Yeah,
That's
that's
great.
pretty
Also
amazing.
say like being able to detail like the fetus in the womb, the baby in the womb.
Yeah.
This generation now didn't have that information of the past generation, and so now they're kind of looking at things differently.
Yep.
They can see all that detail and they're like, wait a minute, we didn't know this.
That's it.
Now we see it and we know it. Now what are we gonna think about this?
Right. Huge advances in what we can know and discover about people, about the world around us. Somebody was saying something over here?
Yeah, I just like what Nancy said about
Yeah.
creation and how much we understand about creation mathematically, and just all that goes into that. It's really exciting and encouraging, and it's like, if people look at it and they still deny, it's just like, how can you deny there's not a creator? I mean, it's pretty amazing.
It is.
And then what you guys said about with technology with babies, when even when they look in a brain and they can see a tumor, or they can pinpoint exactly where they're going to do different things medically, it's like, it's pretty amazing.
It is incredible what we can get. And so there's a lot of very good things that we get from technology. Here are a few maybe categories that I thought of ahead of time. You guys have gone outside of this a bit, but a lot of them fall within this. Within each category, we can find not only really positive examples, which you guys are naming, but we also can find a negative counterpart. Entertainment, is that good or bad in and of itself? It could be great. It could be bad, right? If we're avoiding what we're supposed to be doing because we're sitting there watching YouTube videos, or if there's content in the entertainment that we shouldn't be ingesting, I mean, or it can help us to rest and to defuse a little bit, or to laugh, or to learn.
I think what my struggle is too, is sometimes I can't communicate something so as fast as something on the computer can, or share things, so that gets a little overwhelming for me, but I think it's amazing too at the same time.
Yeah.
But then they kind of see so many good things that they're just like, hopefully they see the heart and realize the person behind the one that's personally caring.
Yeah.
Like.
The ability to communicate through technology is very, very strong. Efficiency, we've talked about a lot. Efficiency, of course, can make our lives better, can make us better at saving more lives, can make us better at growing more food. Sometimes we can end up being efficient in a way of serving a system or a machine and losing sight of personal interaction. I think sometimes if we're only concerned with efficiency and doing more, quicker, better, faster, we lose the value of what it's like to sit down, pause in life, sew a patch in your clothes, which may not feel very efficient, but there could be a lot of value in that. And if we're driven only by efficiency to do more, better, faster, we forget maybe the people that are around us. And we live for bigger, better, more. And so there can be a danger in that too.
I was say, even with efficiency, as opposed to looking for, more, the faster, more, it's just if you focus on the faster, like, well, if I can get this done in less time, I have more time to just be lazy. So efficiency for laziness.
Right.
And the fact that, like, I need to I can get only X amount of stuff work done in a day, in an 8-hour day at work, but now if I can get that done in 4 hours, I've got 4 hours of the day, I'm getting the same amount of work done, so it looks like I'm being just as productive as before. I'm not sitting around and watching 2 videos at work and no one's watching.
Also breeds instant gratification.
Good. Different ways that there could be a negative counterpart. Connecting with others. I was just able to send some messages on WhatsApp to Alan Hutchison, who just moved to South Africa. That's awesome. We were texting for a little bit, catching up. I wouldn't really be able to communicate with him if it was stamp my seal and put it on a boat, right? It'd be a little while before I got a letter back. What are some of the possible negative counterparts to digital connection with others?
I think it makes sense that it helps with connecting with others when you meet this person in person, and then you move here, and you want to still connect with that person. I think it's very different. I think the biggest thing that I think is hard, because when you're an adult, you can handle that, and it's good, and you can maintain, you can have boundaries around that. But I feel like a lot of times with younger kids, I see this in the high schools and middle schools all the time, where they're connecting with people across the world that they don't know and they've never met in person, and because of that, and also even they'll talk with people at school that they've never actually talked to in person at school, but they'll talk to them online because they play the same game or they're on the same platform or whatever. And because of that, I've heard it said that it's the most connected generation ever, but it's also the most isolated because they don't have the face-to-face interaction of building that actual relationship. And actually, one thing Ben was talking about, which I had never even really thought of, is Samuel, so our 3.5-year-old, I have Instagram, right? And I've got Instagram and I have just my family members on there so that they could all see, and a couple friends, so that they could see, actually I have more people than just down there, but the people that we actually limited it to, the only people that can see our story, the one that gets posted every day if we put videos on, is just the family. Because initially I had it to everyone, and Ben's like, well, that's not fair to Samuel, because they all know Samuel, and they come over and they know him really well, they know everything he's done, they know everything about him, but he doesn't have the same opportunity to meet them, and to know them, and to build that relationship two-way. And so it's a one-way relationship where he's so young that, he doesn't know any different, but they come in and they're like, they think that they're best friends with him, and he's never met them.
Right.
And I had never thought about that, and so we limited that so that it's only that small group that can even see that, because it's the first generation that their lives are pretty much broadcasted. And so it does create this connection with everyone if they want it to be. And I see I have a lot of friends that their posts of their kids are all over the place. And not that it's it's how you intend on using it, but at the same time there is those challenges there. I think the younger the kid is, high school and below, I feel like it's very challenging. That connectedness can get really mixed with real life relationships.
And it's a form of connection, but as you mentioned, it's not the fullness of how we are designed to connect with other human beings. And so if that is our connection just through digital media, then we're lacking a huge part of how God designed us to have person-to-person, I can see you, touch you, interact with you relationships. Jen?
Yeah, kind of on the same heels as what Alyssa was saying, the difference between utilizing your whatever device it might be for the benefit of connecting with others, but then but then in contrast, not being present for those that are around you if you're at home. I was just thinking about like home with my kid and stuff, and if I'm not being present with him for a learning moment or a good example setting or teaching or whatever, strike against mom. So the trying to balance that a little bit better maybe before he's awake in the morning, during a nap time or whatever, just utilizing the time balance better to be present.
Good, that our connection through media is not usurping a connection with those around us, which it certainly can, and it certainly does. Ben.
A lot of people broadcast their issues and problems to the whole world on social media or whatever, but they won't talk to somebody in person about that, like, or they won't even address if I had a problem with Chad or whatever, I might post everything online, like, Chad did this and this and this or whatever, but I won't talk to Chad to his face and stuff, so it ruins relationships in that sense.
Yep.
Seeking validity from people who may have sympathy for you or the situation, but can't help.
Right.
And I don't have a problem with Chad.
I'm glad you cleared that up. That's good. Because you were telling me and not him if you did, so. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of, I mentioned entertainment out of order accidentally. We know possible negatives of that easily. Education, what are some possible negative counterparts of the education we can get through digital media?
You don't learn right. Writing cursive out of schools, but seriously, if you're typing all the time, like you lose the art, but you also lose the brain-to-hand connection of learning.
And they can't spell.
And they can't spell because it
can't spell. They don't know their address.
Right.
So handwriting, and we could expand handwriting, right? Handwriting and spelling, but we could expand it to practical skills that we need to be able to have to function in life. We may lose if we are dependent too much on what we're doing in media. Marie.
The statistics that are coming out about attention span for the generation that gets everything off of YouTube.
They
In fact,
said,
I would.
yeah, well, they just said,
I think it was Ray Comfort was saying, okay, you can use this for that generation, that age group, because they'll only listen for X amount of minutes because that's what their brain's been conditioned.
yeah, they were saying that the generation, well, at least for Generation Y, which is 1985 to 1990 and past that, they basically said that the attention span is equal to their age in years. Which actually, when I think about it, I'm 27, and I'd say, I am disciplined enough that I can focus beyond that.
It's about time you wrapping up.
Well, if I'm interacting, it's different, right? But if it's just a lecture, I'd say my attention span is right around a half hour. And not that I'm doing things to change that, but it's crazy.
So funny.
That's
So-
also cultural, though.
It is.
I mean,
yeah.
not meaning that it's, because there's
Just
so many
technology.
factors, right? TV with Sesame Street, that was a large concern because the segments were so short.
Right.
How is that influencing the brain? But, culturally, what is our time period in which it's acceptable to keep an audience occupied so that within our culture, there's a mechanism, a little alarm that goes off and thinks, it's time to get up now, it's time to go. But then I think on the other hand, and I'm just trying to think of what other factors could be a part of it is, I don't know if universally it would be interesting to discover just by the human brain itself, how long really are we successfully able to focus?
Yeah.
I've understood that it's 15 minutes anyway, and I don't know if that would be true for those who have never been exposed to technology, if those in tribal regions, or, how does our brain function? Anyway, so I know that there are these other components that influence us and then are enhanced, perhaps, maybe not the word enhanced, but are
Accentuated.
accentuated by the culture in which we live and the things that we're exposed to by media.
Thank you. By our culture, by technology. So we're learning a lot, but even the medium itself is influencing our brain. So I saw Brandon's hand, and then we got a few more.
Also, just how much wrong information there can be on the internet. When I was in college, they told us never use Wikipedia because never use Wikipedia because the information could be wrong. One of my professors is because someone can just go on there and say the sun is blue, And the next day, one of my classes was just like, just so you know, if you go on Wikipedia, it might say today that the sun is blue. Because changed it. But it's just like, there's so many information, there's so much information out there that's wrong that because of the presentation itself, it might seem like, oh, well, this is really professional, this could
Yeah.
be really true,
Right.
you know, all this stuff, but it's actually wrong.
Yeah.
So is it trustworthy info that comes? Good. David?
Yeah, I find this very interesting, and I actually went around and looked at local private Christian schools to see how they're approaching this. And you have a Cedar Tree, which is classical Christian. You go there and you sit down and talk to them, and they're like, well, we're not really making technology a huge focus of our curriculum. You can also go up the road to Cornerstone, and they approach it very differently. And Cornerstone is essentially a Christian technological school, is how I look at it. So it is interesting how these schools are approaching it differently. My son goes to Cornerstone, but as you showed there in that slide where it is, you know, the cattle are contained, Christian embraces technology, but is very structured in how they approach it with the kids. So it is interesting, but
Yeah.
I think that it is that healthy balance, right, that we're attempting to achieve with them.
That's right. Good. Thank you. Ben, and then we'll go on.
Well, I was thinking kind of along the lines of what Brandon was saying, it's like the information is so abundant and so available, like maybe they can get educated and get information that they're not mentally ready for, right?
Yeah. And we may mention this a little more later, but in addition to are they ready, as we look to technology and to educate ourselves, sometimes it tends to isolate us from others, and it can feed kind of a lie of, I can do it all on my own. Whatever I want to do, I'm going to just learn how to do it by Googling and watching a couple YouTube videos. And in one sense, we can learn a whole lot of really good things that's really helpful. But if we take that as a lie of I don't need other people, or I'm not going to be willing to ask or to learn from other people, there's a very negative counterpart to learning in that way. So what are we left with? Here's my take. We've talked about a lot of really good things that can come from technology. We've talked about those same good things all have negative counterparts. In and of itself, it seems that technology can contribute or detract from us loving God and loving others. So because of that, how do we discern the right use of technology in our lives? Certainly there are going to be some objective criteria that we would be able to look at, that somebody looking at a person sitting at a table using a phone, they could observe, is that the right use or the wrong use? What are some objective criteria that would help us to discern if something is, if we're using technology right or wrong? Is it a little foggy, a little vague?
Well, I was just thinking in terms of some of the high school age kids I know, I guess if they're isolating themselves, like if you go out to dinner, I mean, you see it all the time. You go out to dinner, you know, and the kids are, either the parents are talking and the kids are watching something on the phone so that they're not being loud, or the kids are sitting there coloring crayons, the parents are on their phones, both not even talking to each other. But, you know, if it's isolating you from people that are within your vicinity and you're not even engaging. I mean, little things, like you go into the grocery store, I feel like it's very common now for people to be looking, you know, as they're walking in, looking at their phones, or, you know, like even headbuds, I feel like can be very common. Anything that like keeps you from connecting with people that are right in front of you, even if you don't know them, you know, I feel like it can be very, like if I see you looking at your phone, I'm not gonna talk to you, right? Or if I see someone else, I always thought it was funny wearing headbuds in college, you know, and I was like, oh hey, how's it going, you know, and then they don't hear you. Okay, well, I guess I'll just say hi next time, you know, but.
And these are all the really kind of the negative counterparts that we talked about that are things that we can observe. Here's a few. And so you were talking about isolation in relationships, not fulfilling responsibilities, particular content. If somebody is accessing or looking at things that are damaging or not helpful, of course, that's an issue. If somebody's using technology so much that they're becoming addicted. I mean, these are things from the outside we could look at. And as parents or people involved with young people in our lives, we need to be able to build boundaries and have parameters to be able to engage this objective criteria. So Doreen mentioned observing what her daughter is watching. And so that is a way of looking at the objective criteria within healthy boundaries and seeing, is what she's watching okay or not? But I think we are also given another set of criteria that we have to be willing to engage, and that is a lot more subjective, because somebody could be not using the phone too much, using a social media platform that, say, somebody's 16, you think it's okay for them to have a Facebook profile, and they do, and they're not on Facebook endlessly, but they're there maybe a little bit during the day. Okay, seems like they're using it fine. They're not on their phone too much. They're not accessing pornography on Facebook. They're actually messaging with friends and different things. But we can't just stop there. We need to also engage why are they there. And that, I think, is very subjective, but that is a part of what we need to do, is to ask what is the motive or the heart behind the use. And that will help us to discern if we or our children or our other people in our lives utilizing the technology well. In this book, I mentioned this last time too. This has been a great resource. I appreciate her perspective. This is Kathy Cook, Screens and Teens. She has, so Celebrate Kids is, I think she's one of the primary ones on that website, and she has some other books too. But she talks about ways that young people will go to digital media in order to fill their core needs, she calls them, our central needs, and these would be in unhealthy ways. And of course, this begs the question, how should we be? And whether we're using technology or not, we all can be looking to fill these core needs in ways outside of technology. But as we're engaging the heart behind somebody's use of social media, these are really helpful things to think through. Security would be asking the question, who can I trust? And for somebody who may have been hurt in person, which happens for all of us as we are in relationships with one another, sometimes people can look to technology as the always there thing in their life that isn't going to let them down, instead of being able to engage in relationships. It can make things quick and easy rather than having somebody have to dig through the more difficult. Identity. Who am I? Social media and different places, we have a way to craft how people see us in a unique way. We all can wear a face on Sunday morning or when somebody sees us, but when we are choosing particularly what to share of ourselves on social media, we're crafting our identity. Within social media or different digital technology, it's a source of peer interaction and response. Now here, this is kind of an abstract idea that took me a little bit to engage, but it's really helpful, both from a negative sense, where if people are only interacting through digital technology, then we've talked about this, maybe they're lacking a part of what they need to be in healthy relationships. But here's another book that talked about this from a different perspective that's helpful. This is Navigating Our Digital World. Kara Powell, Art Bamford, Brad Griffin. And they talked about, in normal ways, as we were all growing up, we all learned who we are through our interaction with other people. Now, anybody can be at an unhealthy place where I am going to base my identity based off what you say, and I'm going to compromise on things I shouldn't if peer pressure says I should. Whether you're in digital technology or you're talking to somebody in person, that's not a healthy way to find your identity. But as we were growing up and we didn't have social media as a place where we were interacting with people all the time, maybe if you were in school and you had a lunchroom, and you're in that lunchroom and there you know what table to go to, where you fit, where you don't fit. You're observing how people dress. You're observing how other people are interacting and treating one another and what helps them to be accepted or not accepted. That is a natural, normal way that we discover who we are as we are growing up. One thing we need to realize as we look to shepherd our young people with digital technology is that social media and digital technology platforms are the new lunchroom. At least in part. Now it should be, we want them to be living a healthy, balanced life where they are going to be interacting with groups in person. But we need to be able to discern if I were a young person and I'm going to pick and choose certain things that I'm going to share and I'm going to try to craft myself to be somebody on Instagram that I'm not really, then that would be an unhealthy use of Instagram where I'm forging my identity in a way that's not real. But we need to be able to discern that from a healthy way where I am on Instagram and I am posting things about myself and I am noticing other people and how they react and how they comment and like or react to different things. And that doesn't have to be unhealthy in and of itself. Because now in social media is a place where that kind of peer interaction is happening. Belonging, who wants me? And we talked about ways where people can invest more time in digital relationships than in interaction elsewhere. And so if we're looking in a negative way, somebody going there more than elsewhere. Purpose, why am I alive? Here, through social media, we can see almost too many things that are going on in the world. And how does that affect us? Our world, or our teens' worlds, or people who are on social media or seeing even just the news cycle, the 24-hour news cycle, there's too much that's happening. Dr. Cook talks about one aspect that's essential to our purpose and us living out our purpose is having a hope, having a healthy understanding of what we are for and that there is a good reason for it. Well, if we see so much that's going on and maybe we see only negative things that are happening, that can steal our hope, which can discourage why are we alive. But also it can lessen, it can dilute how we would live out our purpose. So I find out that there are starving children in Africa, and I get really motivated, and I have a purpose to help those children get food, and I'm going to share that video. And then I'm going to move on, and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm just going to keep on going with my life. And maybe that's a way that people think they are living out their purpose if it's only in the digital realm and it just stops there. So it's helping people to understand, learn, motivate, be involved, but live it out too. Competence, what do I do well? Here's that same idea, maybe, that I can isolate myself and think that I'm going to do all the things well because I'm going to learn on my own. Or it can be, I'm actually kind of afraid to get out into the real world and hold down a job, and so I'm going to sit here and play video games. And so either way, digital technology can influence someone's view of competence in a way of inflating it or providing an out or an escape. So this is a blow-by, and these are big, deep questions that require time to think through. But as we're thinking through for ourselves, how do we utilize technology and why? It's helpful to think, what's driving us? Are we trying to fulfill in a negative way some of these core needs through what we're doing? And are those in our lives doing the same? As we seek to discover our own motives, it's also essential. It's really healthy. We talked about helping somebody to be able to utilize technology themselves for the day that they're not under our own roofs Well, one way that we can help provide a way for our children to do that is to help them discern their own motives. What's driving them for what they're doing? So we interact, we engage them. And here, helping people to recognize their own weaknesses. So maybe somebody's a people pleaser and that's the way they post. Well, help them to recognize that. Maybe they naturally lack discipline and that's coming out in all the time that they're spending on video games as opposed to doing their homework. Engage them. Not just on video games are bad, but hey, it looks like lack of discipline is coming out in how you're using this, and be able to engage them. Or if somebody has addictive tendencies toward one thing or another, you can help to point that out and provide tools.
I'll try to keep it quick, but I appreciate that with youth ministry, because there's a gal that's going to the high school ministry, and she was going through relationship issues with friendships, and she came here and felt relationship. So there's such a desire for that, and she's coming more than ever because she's feeling loved. And she's finding in high school, she's not finding as much love there. And so it's been a great encouragement. And they talked about relationships, and that hit home for her, especially that day. So anyways, just encouraged.
Thanks. That's great. Okay. We're nearing. We've got a few minutes left. I know middle school just let out, but here are just a couple more questions. As we think through how we are utilizing technology, how people in our lives, how our family members are utilizing technology, we want to ask, how do we shepherd our families? If we're to do this, to engage our children, our grandchildren, and we want to help to train them to have healthy use, healthy view of who they are, of how they use technology, here's a question for at your tables. What difference does the foundation of a loving relationship look like in being able to guide our children, grandchildren, kids in our lives? If we want to shepherd them well with how to use technology, we need to be able to place boundaries and do lots of different things. What difference does the foundation of a loving relationship make? Ready, go. Okay. I heard lots of good things going across the tables and around. Wonderful. Just a few thoughts for us to leave with, as I heard everybody talking about the essential nature of our relationship and how we are going to shepherd and guide our family. In everything, not just technology, but particularly in technology. And we're talking about what is the heart behind a use. Well, how do you know why somebody's using something if you don't know them? We also need clear guidelines so that we know what's expected, and our children, grandchildren, kids in classes, they know what's expected. How do we establish that? We need to communicate. We need to talk, but we also need to listen. We need to hear from them what's going on in their lives, learn why they're using things, what they want to be able to do, so we can have some give and take sometimes in our guidelines as we are willing to listen and be in relationship with our children. Many people may find helpful a written covenant, something where the family actually comes together and says, this amount of screen time is okay, or this will happen if somebody accesses this kind of content, or we put our phones to bed at this time. That's a very great way, a clear way to establish guidelines that everybody knows what's expected, is talking about them and actually writing them out. But the thing with that is, you need to follow it yourself. If you're going to create a covenant, that we would follow it ourselves. We would model what's going on. Within ideas for guidelines, here's one that has been helpful, engaging a lot of heart motives and why. The Tech-Wise Family by Andy Crouch. He talks about tech-free space, places in their home. He said even when you walk into their home, they have on purpose structured the places where they spend the most time to be low tech or no tech. So they have a TV, but it's off in a different room. That's not something you see when you first walk in. They value creativity and connection, like person-to-person connection with their home space. And so they actually think through what they do with their home as a way to shepherd how they want to utilize technology. tech-free time. Same guy, he says for their family, they do an hour a day a week, and a week a year where they all put away their devices. Now, particulars are going to vary in a huge way for you and your family and what works for you guys. But that could be one way. A phrase it comes from Andy Crouch as well. They, as a family, they put their devices to bed before they go to bed. So they have some time at the end of the night where they're not connected, they're not looking at a screen, and they wake up before they get their devices up. So they have some time just to be a person, to not have the phone right next to them, maybe to interact a little bit, to think through, to prepare for the day before they are using their technology. But thinking through ways in our lives where we can rest apart from digital technology so we can have some tech-free space and some tech-free time. Figuring out what would work for you guys as a family.
I've heard of people doing they'll charge their phones only in the kitchen. It's very common to do it by your bed.
Right.
Which I do too, but.
And that is a big, even kids and friends coming over and what to do, because anything can be accessible from somebody's phone, and so you can have all the protections and relationship you want with your own kids. But what happens when they have a kid who has a smartphone and it has a connection outside of your Wi-Fi? They could potentially be accessing anything. One way to do that is people can have like a similar to charging your phone away from the room, like keeping the phone out of the bedroom for bedtime. But when people come over, say, here's where we put our phones, like just a bin at the front door. It's like, hey, when you're here, we keep all of our phones here when we're in the house. And so friends do that as well. And then when they are hanging out in the home, they're not having to worry about what's being accessed because it's all right there. And it's not a, don't use your phone. If they need to contact their parents or contact their friends, somebody's welcome to come and text or make a phone call, but just not have it in their pocket. Nancy?
I've been talking about these different methods and thinking about the foundation of guiding our children in the way in which we model that. I was thinking how really today, as we seek for ways in which to anesthetize ourselves against the disappointments of our personal family, kids are grown or raised in a very dysfunctional, broken family. Your heart knows that because we yearn for something more. We yearn for the wholeness that God offers us Sunday and through Jesus, so we anesthetize in a variety of ways. And similarly, I think in the way in which Satan now in our world, we have the opportunity to see the dysfunction of the world and the way in which that affects us as a whole culture. So the microcosm of a family and the dysfunction of it, then the city, the world, the nation, the world. And so we're seeking to anesthetize, we're seeking for ways in which we can create a heaven on earth, however we may do that. If it's through technology, if it's through drugs, if it's through sex, if it's through a beautifully coiffed yard, if it's through beautiful clothes, if it's through shopping, if it's through reading all the time, if it's through eating all the time. I mean, when you think of it, and laying the foundation of what we're showing our children, there are so many fronts in which we need to be aware, how are we living? How are we influenced by our upbringing? How are we influenced by our culture that's going to shape this little person, not just in the way in which we react and interact with technology. That's just one of the symptoms that shows up in many fronts. But how are we submitting ourselves to the Spirit of God in us, and to what degree are we really engaging in who He is and what He says? I know for me, the less time I spend with Him, the less time I am pushing in towards Him, the more I am inclined towards wanting to anesthetize in some way that's false. So anyway, something to think about overall when we are trying to live this life in a way to influence others to know Him, our children and our family members, our neighbors. What are we pushing against?
Thank you. Technology is not the cause, right? It's one of the ways that our hearts can live out, good or bad. Yeah. Okay. We will communicate about the next date, January, we're going to plan. And so right now the thought is to have 4 more. We'll confirm if we end up with that many in the spring or not. we're going to continue on technology. And so if you guys are available, join us, invite friends, invite family. We want this to be a place where people get to grow in relationship with one another and hopefully be encouraged through content as you shepherd families. Let's pray and we'll go. Lord, thank you for your care, your presence, your word, which guides us through the big decisions and the little, and you have given us timeless truths that we can always apply no matter what the world looks like. We thank you for your presence. Give us wisdom as we seek to utilize technology in our lives and be involved in the lives of those around us, that we would be able to point them toward you with wisdom and care. And we pray in Jesus' name, amen.